Have you ever watched a war movie and thought that's not how infantry actually moves? That's the problem with most combat films. They sell intensity, not accuracy. Today, we're breaking down the only 11 war movies where infantry tactics are 100% real, not emotionally real, not visually intense, tactically real. Formations, spacing, communication, fire control, command structure. We're ranking them in descending order, and if a film is here, it earned it. Stanley Kubrick did something most war films still avoid. He showed how infantry actually advances when the plan is bad. The trench sequences in Paths of Glory are not cinematic fantasy. They are methodical, grim, and structurally correct. When French soldiers prepare to go over the top, notice the spacing inside the trench. They aren't stacked shoulder to shoulder for drama. They're positioned according to corridor width, waiting for whistles, watching the ladder exits. When the assault begins, there's no dramatic synchronized charge. Men hesitate. Officers push from behind. Some climb out late. Others freeze. That uneven surge forward is historically accurate. World War I assaults were chaotic because morale and survival instinct collided in real time. Look closely at the way soldiers move once exposed. They don't sprint heroically in straight lines. They stumble. They drop into shell craters. They attempt micro-cover behind terrain that barely qualifies as protection. That's not choreography. That's desperation shaped by artillery saturation. Kubrick stages the attack across no man's land with wide tracking shots. And what you see is not cinematic heroism, it's fragmentation. Units lose cohesion almost immediately. Communication collapses under artillery fire. Officers can't effectively redirect once momentum breaks. That loss of command control is historically consistent with First World War frontal assaults. Another detail, weapons handling remains grounded. Rifles are not fired endlessly. Ammunition discipline is implied. Soldiers aren't spraying rounds randomly. They fire cautiously, often hesitantly, because advancing infantry had limited visibility and overwhelming return fire. What elevates the realism is structural critique. The film shows how tactical failure often originates above the infantry level. Command decisions determine exposure. The soldiers execute orders even when terrain makes success impossible. Infantry tactics here are not glamorous. They are constrained by doctrine, terrain, and leadership pressure. There are no exaggerated one-man heroics, no miraculous flanking maneuvers, no dramatic last-minute saves, just a rigid plan meeting machine gun reality. The trench design itself reflects authentic wartime engineering. Narrow passageways, mud compression, limited mobility, and vulnerable ladder exits. That architecture shapes how soldiers move. The most realistic aspect? The assault fails exactly how historical records describe, not because the soldiers lacked courage, but because the plan underestimated defensive firepower. That is tactical realism. Kubrick doesn't romanticize infantry. He shows them bound by structure, doctrine, and flawed command, which is exactly how many real offensives unfolded. And this isn't Hollywood combat. It's doctrine colliding with terrain. Mountain warfare exposes mistakes instantly. Lone Survivor earns its place not because of spectacle, but because of how it portrays small unit vulnerability once compromise occurs. The patrol begins correctly. Four-man team, proper dispersion, controlled movement through uneven Afghan terrain. The spacing between operators reflects realistic interval management for mountainous reconnaissance. They're not walking in a tight cluster. They're staggered to reduce multi-casualty exposure. When the team halts, sectors are quietly covered. There's no theatrical scanning. Each man owns an arc. That silent assignment of responsibility is accurate. Then comes the compromise. The escalation that follows is tactically honest. Once the ambush initiates, the team doesn't suddenly become action heroes. They lose high ground. They attempt bounding retreats under overwhelming fire. Notice the pattern. One element suppresses, the other moves. That's textbook fire and maneuver under duress. But terrain punishes them. This is where realism sharpens. The slopes are steep enough to destabilize footing. Movement becomes chaotic because gravity interferes with discipline. That detail matters. Mountain engagements rarely allow clean tactical execution. The film shows how elevation multiplies exhaustion and disorientation. Communication deteriorates naturally. Radios struggle. Line of sight breaks repeatedly. Commands are shouted, repeated, sometimes misunderstood. That friction isn't exaggerated. It's consistent with high-altitude firefights. Another detail. Ammunition management becomes a visible issue. Magazines deplete quickly under sustained contact. There is no endless firing. Reloads are hurried but not flashy. Weapons malfunction under debris exposure. That friction adds credibility. The team's decision-making reflects small unit ethics and mission parameters. They debate engagement rules before the fight begins. That conversation isn't filler. It demonstrates how rules of engagement influence tactical outcomes. Once surrounded, they attempt lateral displacement rather than standing ground theatrically. They don't form a perfect defensive circle. They scramble for survivable angles while suppressing threats from multiple elevations. Injuries affect mobility realistically. Wounded operators slow the group. Evacuation becomes impossible due to terrain and enemy positioning. There's no miracle helicopter rescue mid-firefight. What the film avoids is just as important as what it shows. No slow-motion hero shots, no exaggerated kill counts, no precision one-shot eliminations across impossible distances. Instead, you see fatigue, desperation, and incremental collapse of a four-man element under numerical disadvantage. The gunfights are loud, messy, and unsustainable. Exactly how small unit engagements become when terrain favors the opposition. The realism here is procedural, not glamorous. It demonstrates how even well-trained infantry can be tactically sound and still overwhelmed. That's not cinematic invincibility. That's combat math. Large-scale engagements expose whether a film understands command structure. We Were Soldiers does. The Battle of Ia Drang is not presented as random chaos. It unfolds through layered command decisions, realistic insertion patterns, and disciplined defensive adaptation. When helicopters begin landing at landing zone X-ray, spacing becomes critical. Troops disembark and immediately expand outward to establish perimeter security. They do not bunch near the landing zone for dramatic effect. Each platoon establishes sectors. Officers relay adjustments. There is visible chain of command flow. Orders move from battalion to company to platoon in structured sequence. That hierarchy matters because infantry survival depends on it. Once contact begins, fire discipline becomes the defining detail. Soldiers do not fire continuously. They identify direction, suppress, relocate. Machine gun teams establish base of fire positions while rifle elements maneuver. The film correctly shows how suppressive fire is not meant to eliminate instantly. It is designed to create movement opportunity. Artillery coordination is portrayed with surprising procedural accuracy. Grid references are communicated under pressure. Fire missions are adjusted in increments. Danger close support is not requested casually. It is weighed against friendly positions. One of the strongest tactical sequences occurs during perimeter defense at night. Soldiers reposition to reinforce weak points instead of standing rigidly in original locations. The defensive line flexes according to pressure. Another subtle but accurate element is casualty management under fire. Wounded are not immediately evacuated. They are treated where feasible while combat continues. Medics move cautiously, not recklessly. That hesitation reflects battlefield reality. Communication breakdown is gradual, not theatrical. Radios crackle. Confusion builds. Yet leadership presence remains central. Commanders physically move to critical areas to maintain cohesion. That mobility of officers under fire aligns with historical accounts of Ia Drang. The film avoids glorifying bayonet charges or unrealistic hand-to-hand dominance. Instead, it shows attritional combat where terrain, artillery, and reinforcement timing determine survival. Infantry tactics here are neither flashy nor overly cinematic. They are structured, layered, and shaped by doctrinal Vietnam-era strategy. The result is a battle that feels large because command decisions feel real. This isn't chaos without direction. It's organized violence under pressure. Jungle warfare punishes noise and poor spacing. Platoon understands that. From the opening patrol sequences, spacing between soldiers reflects realistic anti-ambush interval. They do not walk shoulder to shoulder through dense vegetation. Each man maintains distance to reduce vulnerability to a single explosive or burst of automatic fire. Notice how patrol speed remains controlled. There is no cinematic sprinting through foliage. Movement is cautious, measured, and often halted for listening pauses. That rhythm mirrors actual jungle patrol procedure. When ambushed, reactions are fragmented and immediate. Soldiers dive for partial cover rather than forming tidy defensive arcs. That disorder is authentic. Ambushes in dense terrain rarely allow coordinated textbook responses. The film's most tactically credible element is how uncertainty shapes behavior. Units fire toward muzzle flashes, not clearly visible enemies. Visibility remains limited. Return fire is instinctive, not precision-based. Night operations demonstrate discipline. Claymore mines are positioned outward. Listening posts extend beyond the main perimeter. Guards rotate shifts with visible fatigue. Another accurate detail is the psychological erosion affecting tactical performance. Fear causes overfiring. Anger leads to poor decision-making. Internal division between leadership figures affects operational cohesion. Unlike many Vietnam films, Platoon does not exaggerate kill counts or portray soldiers as hyper-efficient operators. Engagements are messy, confused, and short-lived. Weapons handling reflects era-specific realism. M16 malfunctions are referenced. Reloads occur without stylized flair. Ammunition is finite. Perhaps most importantly, the film portrays how terrain dictates tactics. Soldiers crouch low due to tree lines. They advance in staggered formation where possible. When terrain tightens, they compress reluctantly. There is no artificial heroic positioning against sunset backdrops. Combat feels cramped. That spatial discomfort is precisely what jungle warfare produces. The tactical realism here lies in vulnerability, not dominance. Defensive infantry doctrine is rarely portrayed with patience. Letters from Iwo Jima earns its position because it understands that survival on Iwo Jima depended on underground engineering, interlocking fields of fire, and delayed engagement, not cinematic beach charges. The tunnel systems are not aesthetic set pieces, they are doctrinally accurate. Japanese forces did not rely on suicidal bonsai charges during the initial stages of the battle. Instead, they constructed fortified underground networks designed to preserve manpower and force prolonged attrition. The film reflects that shift in strategy. Notice how defenders avoid exposing themselves prematurely. They hold fire until U.S. Marines move into effective kill zones. That restraint aligns with General Kuribayashi's historical defensive doctrine: conserve ammunition, maximize impact. When firing begins, positions are concealed. Machine gun nests are embedded within hardened structures. Soldiers relocate through tunnels rather than sprinting above ground. That subterranean maneuvering prevents easy targeting, a tactically sound defensive adaptation. Spacing inside the tunnels is cramped but functional. Soldiers move single file. Communication is whispered, not shouted. Ammunition is distributed carefully. There is no endless firing. Resupply becomes a logistical challenge once bombardment intensifies. Another strong detail: counterattacks are limited and calculated, and small units attempt localized disruption rather than mass frontal charges. Those movements are brief and purpose-driven, not theatrical. Command presence is subtle but structured. Orders flow through confined spaces. Discipline holds despite overwhelming artillery. When cohesion begins to fracture, it does so gradually, under attrition, not dramatic collapse. The film also avoids glamorizing last stands. Defensive positions are abandoned only when tactically untenable. and soldiers shift sectors through tunnel networks rather than charging into open ground. Perhaps most importantly, the Americans are portrayed using realistic combined arms pressure, flamethrowers, demolition teams, and coordinated infantry advance, forcing Japanese defenders to adapt under increasing compression. This is not spectacle-driven combat. It is layered defensive doctrine under siege, and that procedural accuracy secures its position. Defensive warfare exposes whether a film understands terrain vulnerability. The Outpost does not romanticize its battlefield. Combat Outpost. Keating sits in a valley surrounded by higher ground, a tactical disadvantage that every soldier in the film visibly understands. That geographic reality shapes every movement. From the beginning, you see perimeter routines that feel procedural rather than cinematic. Guard towers are manned with overlapping fields of observation. Soldiers reinforce sandbag walls not because it looks dramatic, but because elevation dominance belongs to the enemy. When the assault begins, confusion unfolds in layers. Incoming fire originates from multiple high points. Defenders do not return fire randomly. They identify direction, establish sectors, and attempt to redistribute manpower to collapsing positions. Machine gunners do not spray endlessly. They conserve bursts to maintain suppressive pressure. What makes this portrayal tactically credible is how quickly defensive cohesion strains under volume. Soldiers reposition from damaged bunkers to secondary cover. Casualties interrupt planned resistance. Ammunition becomes a logistical problem, not an afterthought. Radio communication degrades naturally. Requests for air support are structured, not shouted theatrically. Coordinates are relayed with urgency but procedural clarity. Notice how individuals do not charge heroically uphill into enemy fire. Instead, they fight to hold defensive ground while awaiting reinforcement. When counterattacks occur, they are limited and purposeful, not symbolic gestures. Another accurate detail is how exhaustion becomes visible. Defensive engagements require sustained alertness. You see soldiers breathing hard, struggling to maintain situational awareness after hours of continuous contact. Weapon transitions feel practical. Rifles jam under debris. Magazines deplete. Soldiers grab whatever ammunition is accessible rather than performing clean reloads for visual appeal. The film avoids portraying defenders as invincible. Positions are overrun incrementally. Some sectors collapse entirely. Others hold by inches. That incremental breakdown reflects how real defensive battles unfold, not through instant victory or defeat, but through pressure points shifting until reinforcement or attrition decides the outcome. The geography dictates tactics, and the tactics feel grounded in survival, not spectacle. Irregular warfare is rarely symmetrical. Come and See captures that imbalance without cinematic polish. The partisan fighters depicted in the film do not operate like disciplined, conventional infantry. Their movements reflect limited resources, uneven training, and environmental improvisation. When they traverse forest terrain, spacing is inconsistent, not because of poor filmmaking, but because partisan units often lacked rigid formation discipline. Movement patterns are influenced by fear, rumor, and limited reconnaissance. Engagements occur abruptly. There is no dramatic buildup with orchestral swelling. Gunfire erupts without clean lines of sight. Fighters often fire toward sound rather than confirmed visual targets. Another realistic element is the absence of sustained firefight choreography. Exchanges are short, brutal, and disorganized. Fighters scatter when overwhelmed rather than holding ground theatrically. Weapon handling appears uneven. Some carry rifles confidently, others grip them uncertainly. That inconsistency reflects militia-style combat rather than professional infantry cohesion. Perhaps the strongest tactical realism lies in vulnerability. Villages offer little defensive depth. Civilians and fighters occupy the same fragile terrain. Defensive positions are improvised rather than engineered. The film does not depict partisans as elite guerrillas executing flawless ambushes. Instead, it shows how resistance movements often operate under fear, resource scarcity, and strategic disadvantage. When German forces retaliate, they do so with structured dominance. Their formations appear organized and coordinated, contrasting sharply with partisan fragmentation. This asymmetry underscores historical reality. Irregular fighters rarely enjoy parity in firepower or command structure. There are no heroic last stands framed for applause. There is only survival instinct colliding with overwhelming force. The realism here is psychological as much as tactical. Combat feels destabilizing because irregular warfare is destabilizing. That absence of polished maneuver makes it disturbingly authentic. Authenticity changes when cameras stop directing. Restrepo is not scripted drama. It is embedded documentation of U.S. soldiers stationed in Afghanistan's Korangal Valley. Because it is documentary footage, tactical realism is not interpreted, it is observed. Patrol formations reflect real-world interval spacing. Soldiers move in staggered columns along mountain paths. Each man scans assigned sectors rather than wandering aimlessly. When contact occurs, reactions are immediate but structured. Soldiers drop to cover, return fire in controlled bursts, and attempt to identify origin points before escalating suppression. The terrain dictates pace. Steep ridgelines, slow movement. Elevation changes exhaust personnel rapidly. There are no stylized charges uphill. Radio communication feels cluttered and urgent. Requests for support are procedural. Clarifications occur mid-engagement. Another critical detail is the downtime between firefights. Soldiers reinforce positions, construct sandbag walls, and dig fighting holes according to defensive doctrine. Observation posts are established with deliberate line-of-sight considerations. Soldiers discuss angles of exposure rather than delivering dramatic speeches. There is visible caution during every patrol. Corners are approached carefully. Vegetation is scanned deliberately. Silence often precedes movement. When casualties occur, responses are methodical. Medics apply treatment while others maintain suppressive arcs. There are no cinematic slow-motion heroics. There is fatigue, boredom, tension, and sudden violence in uneven cycles. The absence of scripted drama enhances tactical authenticity. Infantry behavior here is procedural because real infantry behavior is procedural. It is repetitive, cautious, and shaped entirely by terrain and threat probability. That raw routine is what makes it credible. This is not Hollywood realism, it is operational footage. The opening sequence on Omaha Beach is often discussed for its intensity. What matters here is its structure. When the landing craft ramps drop, soldiers do not pour out in heroic waves. Many are cut down instantly because the beach offers almost no cover. Those who survive don't stand and fire dramatically. They crawl. They drag equipment. They flatten themselves behind steel obstacles and fallen bodies because elevation advantage belongs entirely to the defenders. Watch the small unit movement once Captain Miller begins regrouping survivors. He doesn't shout inspirational lines. He establishes direction. He identifies a breach point. He assigns tasks. Machine gunners create suppressive fire toward pillboxes. Riflemen move in short bursts between partial cover. That's fire and maneuver. Not cinematic chaos, but tactical necessity. Hand signals appear repeatedly. Verbal commands are often drowned out by artillery. Leaders rely on physical gestures because battlefield noise overwhelms speech. As the squad advances inland through hedgerows later in the film, spacing tightens and expands depending on terrain. Soldiers do not cluster casually. They stagger themselves to reduce vulnerability to ambush. When clearing buildings, entry is controlled. Weapons stay raised. Corners are sliced carefully. There is no exaggerated spinning or reckless rushing. Another strong detail is ammunition awareness. Reloads are visible and frequent. Soldiers scavenge supplies. Weapons jam or misfire. Combat feels resource-bound rather than unlimited. Perhaps the most accurate element is hesitation. Infantry do not move with superhero confidence. They pause. They breathe hard. They argue under pressure. The film also avoids portraying flawless coordination. Miscommunication leads to casualties. Panic spreads unevenly. In the final defensive stand at Rommel, Miller's squad fortifies deliberately. They place explosives strategically. They assign overlapping fields of fire. They anticipate armor movement rather than waiting passively. Nothing feels stylized. It feels like doctrine under stress. And that is why it holds up tactically. Urban warfare punishes exposure instantly. Black Hawk Down captures that risk without exaggeration. From the initial insertion, Rangers secure perimeter zones before transitioning to objective movement. They establish blocking positions at street intersections. They do not wander aimlessly into open alleys. When the first helicopter crashes, response teams do not charge blindly. They reorganize, assess direction of fire, and move with bounding overwatch between buildings. Notice the stacking procedures before entering structures. Operators align tightly against walls. Weapons angle inward. Entry happens with deliberate sequencing. Inside buildings, corners are cleared methodically. No spinning theatrics. No reckless center room exposure. Convoys maintain spacing despite narrow streets. Drivers attempt to avoid predictable routes. Vehicles do not cluster unless forced by terrain. Radio communication is constant and layered. Multiple command elements coordinate extraction, reinforcement, and air support simultaneously. One of the most realistic aspects is fatigue. As the battle extends overnight, soldiers slow down. Decision-making becomes strained. Coordination suffers under exhaustion. Wounded personnel are prioritized, but never at the expense of full situational collapse. Security elements maintain arcs even while evacuations occur. There are no miraculous headshots from impossible distances. Firefights are loud, disorienting, and often indecisive. Urban combat is portrayed as a maze of angles, blind spots, and crossfire risks. That complexity feels authentic. This film respects how dangerous city fighting truly is. Infantry tactics are about structure under stress. Das Boot earns the top position because it understands operational discipline at the smallest level, even in a confined, non-traditional battlefield. While centered on submarine warfare, its portrayal of coordinated small unit procedure mirrors infantry doctrine principles. Chain of command, compartmentalization of roles, controlled communication, and strict fire authority. Like every movement inside the submarine reflects assigned responsibility. Orders are issued clearly, repeated for confirmation, and executed without theatrical improvisation. No one acts independently for dramatic effect. Structure governs survival. When depth charges begin falling, crew members do not panic into chaos. They execute damage control protocol. Each man moves to pre-assigned stations. Reporting is concise. Repairs are prioritized logically. That procedural layering mirrors infantry command response during sustained contact. Notice the communication hierarchy. The captain evaluates incoming sonar reports. The executive officer relays instructions. Engineers respond with status updates. This cascading chain of command is tactically consistent with disciplined military structure. Another key realism marker: fatigue degradation. As engagements extend, exhaustion visibly impacts reaction time and morale. Yet procedural compliance remains intact. Doctrine sustains cohesion under pressure. There are no heroic deviations, no dramatic solo rescues, no miraculous evasive maneuvers unsupported by mechanics. Survival depends on coordination and controlled decision-making. Even weapon employment reflects restraint. Torpedoes are not launched impulsively. Targeting solutions are calculated. Fire authorization follows confirmation, not emotion. Most importantly, stress fractures occur gradually. An authority is questioned internally but maintained externally. That tension mirrors real combat environments where structure prevents collapse. Why does this take the top spot? Because it demonstrates the core truth of infantry realism. Discipline is stronger than spectacle. Whether in trenches, jungles, cities, or beneath the sea, tactical authenticity is about procedure, chain of command, and controlled violence, not cinematic heroics. Das Boot embodies that principle without exaggeration. And that structural fidelity earns number one. Most war movies chase spectacle. These films respect structure. Infantry tactics are not glamorous. They are procedural, exhausting, and shaped by terrain, leadership, and discipline. If realism matters to you, these are the titles that earned it. And if you think one deserves that number one spot instead, say it clearly. And we'll break it down next.